Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the leather boots and velvet coat of one of the loudest, most overlooked figures of medieval society, the town crier. You stand in the heart of the square, gripping a brass handbell and preparing to shout things people may not want to hear. News of taxes, laws, lost geese, or that Sir Gregory's ale license has been revoked again. Your voice has to carry over bleating sheep, creaky carts, and the never-ending clank of smithy hammers. You are, in every sense, the human version of a pop-up ad, except instead of "click here," you shout "hear ye." This job is oddly prestigious and incredibly dangerous. You're required to read the king's decrees exactly as written, or you risk imprisonment. But you also might get tipped in ale. Go figure. Oh, and by the way, this isn't a role that usually ends with a gold watch and retirement cottage. You'll likely keep doing it until your voice gives out, or until some goose-stealing peasant mistakes you for the tax collector and chases you into a ditch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning is gray. Always gray. The damp sort of gray that leaks into your bones. You wake in a drafty loft above a tavern, the scent of stale hops and last night's spilled soup clinging to your clothes before you've even sat up. Your knees pop like firewood in the hearth as you stumble to your feet. You reach for your uniform, a woolen tunic dyed a faded crimson, a sash bearing your town's crest, and, most importantly, your wide-brimmed feathered hat. Without it, you're just some guy shouting things. Downstairs, the tavern keeper nods as you pass. You get your breakfast, a hunk of bread, a bowl of gruel, and a small onion. That's it. But hey, you get free meals with your position. Sort of. You're also expected to deliver the tavern's taxes every other Thursday. So the free part is debatable. Outside, the mud greets you like an old enemy. The square is quiet for now. Soon, the place will fill with vendors and livestock, but your job begins first. You ring your bell, not too hard, just enough to summon interest, not panic. Hear why, hear why. You call, with that practiced blend of authority and performance. By order of the Lord Mayor, market fees shall increase by 1 silver penny per stall. There's a long silence. A chicken screams in the distance. Someone mutters, "Bloody thieves." You're used to this. Your voice is your most valuable tool, and the most at risk. You've developed tricks, warm water with honey, staying quiet after sundown, breathing from the belly. But still, there are days when your throat feels like sandpaper. One crier in York swore by raw garlic. Another in Bruges swore by never speaking to his wife. Town criers weren't unique to England. The role existed across Europe and even parts of the Middle East and Asia, though under different titles. But the essential function was the same: to deliver public information in a world without print or phones. Literacy was rare. Paper was expensive. You were loud and free. The content of your announcements ranges wildly. Some days it's simple. The well's been poisoned again. Other days, it's less urgent. A noble's daughter has a pet peacock, and everyone should applaud. No, really. Applaud. A dog growls at you. You step around a fresh pile of horse droppings and prepare to deliver the second item of the day. Let it be known, you bellow, that the tax collector shall visit all households south of the river by week's end. Be prepared with your ledgers. A brick doesn't fly at your head this time. Progress. People often think town criers were merely announcers, but the truth is, you're also a legal instrument. Once a proclamation is read aloud and witnessed by at least 2 townsfolk, it's considered lawfully delivered. That's a lot of pressure. You've got to pronounce every name, date, and obscure land clause correctly. You've definitely been yelled at for mispronouncing "thrice ye barred barley levy." You remember old Thomas, the crier before you. He had a deep, resonant voice and a limp that made his every step a metronome. He claimed to have cried for 47 years. He also claimed to have once eaten a squirrel stew with King Henry himself. Historians still argue whether that's even remotely plausible, but you sort of believe him. He had that look, half liar, half legend. But unlike Thomas, you have dreams of surviving, of making it through one full year without catching the pox or slipping on frozen hog dung. A low bar, perhaps, but that's medieval ambition for you. You finish your final announcement. A merchant caravan has been delayed due to bandits. You emphasize the word bandits dramatically, just to keep the children entertained. They clap. One throws you a small apple. It's mostly bruises, but it's yours. The day has barely begun. Soon you'll check in with the bailiff for updates, memorize tomorrow's declarations, and practice that one bit about will tariffs you keep tripping over. But for now, you stand tall, bell at your side, voice ringing through the damp square like a thread stitching the town together. They may not love the message, but they always hear it. You wake before the roosters. Not because you want to, never because you want to, but because the town expects it. Criers are early risers by necessity, not virtue. The parchment with today's declarations won't memorize itself, and you'd rather rehearse the town's new salt ration policy than get caught misreading it in front of a dozen fishwives who will throw last week's trout at your head. You grope around for your boots, worn down to the leather's last layer. They make a squeak-slap noise as you shuffle across the warped floorboards. It's a miserable sound. They'll echo down the empty lanes and wake the baker's dog, which will set off the chickens, which will set off the neighbor's wife, who already hates your godless spell. But this is your job. You're not a lord. You don't own land. You don't even own your bell. It belongs to the town. But what you do have is authority, at least until someone with a sword shows up. And for a commoner in medieval England, that's more power than most people get. Outside, it's still half dark. The sky glows faintly violet, hinting at the sun behind thick fog. The street is slick with dew and the leavings of animals who care nothing for curfews or cobblestones. You sidestep a questionable puddle and make your way to the scribe's hall. The scribe is already there, chewing on a quill and muttering about Latin grammar. He hands you the day's decrees, 4 of them, scribbled in tight script with just enough space between lines for you to scribble your pronunciation notes. You rehearse aloud, quietly, in the alley behind the building. You repeat the names and fines, the locations and dates, the by orders and under penalty of clauses. You practice pausing just before the word confiscated, because drama matters. And then you move to your first location, the town gate. This is where the travelers come in. Merchants, pilgrims, vagrants, they all pass through here. Your first announcement is aimed at them. You ring the bell. Once, twice. The clanging metal feels like shaking the sleep from your own bones. Hear ye, by order of the bailiff. All goods entering town must be declared at the gatehouse and subject to inspection. Failure to comply shall result in forfeiture. The gate guard nods. A passing merchant curses under his breath. You log it mentally as a win. From there, it's on to the square. The cobbler is opening shop. A boy is herding 2 grumpy-looking goats. You read the second proclamation, a curfew reminder. The goats do not care. You march on. Your route includes 6 key stops every morning, and you're expected to hit them all by noon. The bridge, the market, the west gate, the well, the church steps, and finally, the gallows hill, though you always save that one for last. Too grim before breakfast. At each stop, you ring the bell and shout the announcements. People scowl, nod, mutter. Occasionally someone listens. Usually not. But it doesn't matter. They heard you, and that's enough. In the eyes of the law, they've been informed. Your feet ache by mid-morning. These shoes were once fashionable. If brightly dyed leather and wooden soles could ever count as fashionable, but now they're mostly a suggestion of footwear. One of your heels is worn down at an angle that forces you to walk like a poorly oiled windmill. There's a tradition in some towns. The crier's shoes are never replaced unless both soles fall off. It's meant to show endurance. Or, more likely, it's just a budgeting choice. But either way, you're stuck with them. The one benefit: everyone hears you coming. That squeak-slap rhythm is practically a signature. You once heard a child mimic it perfectly. while announcing a fake edict about mandatory goose hats. That kid's going places. At the market square, you deliver your most delicate message of the day. A new cheese levy. The reaction is not great. Several grocers groan. One throws a head of wilted lettuce. You dodge. Barely. You ring the bell again, more sternly this time. The sound slices through the chatter. Let it be known, you shout, that henceforth imported cheeses shall be subject to a fee of 3 copperpence per wheel, as decreed by the Guild of Dairy and the Lord Mayor himself. Someone mutters, "We'll see how long that lasts." You smile sweetly and move on. Conflict avoided. For now, back at the well, a washerwoman tells you the news. Someone's horse fell in last night. You make a mental note to mention that to the constable. No one wants oat-flavored drinking water. You don't just deliver news, you collect it. Town criers often functioned like unofficial reporters, absorbing gossip, alerts, and tips between bell rings. It's how you stay ahead of your own job. No one wants to be the last to know there's a fire on Mill Lane when they're supposed to be announcing public safety ordinances. A century from now, newspapers will make all this obsolete. But for now, you're the closest thing people have to a local feed. In fact, the tradition of calling people's attention to news by shouting evolved directly into printed crier sheets, the ancestor of today's tabloids. Historians still argue whether these sheets began as supplemental handouts or as replacements entirely. Your route ends, mercifully, at the gallows hill. No execution today, thank goodness. But there's still one thing to announce. The Lord's proclamation about upcoming tithes. You shout it loud, though your voice cracks slightly on the word corn. You cough into your sleeve. Your voice is your craft, and it's already fraying. You'll need hot water, honey, and maybe a quiet hour under a blanket to get it back in shape. Back home. Well, back to your tiny rented room. You unstrap your bell and set it on the table. Your feet pulse. Your throat burns. You've earned your lunch, even if it's just cold lentils and half a radish. You've survived another morning. Your bell is louder than your voice today, which is saying something. The metal clapper's clang still rings in your ears as you head to the market again, this time not to cry out news, but to buy a few essentials. Mostly onions. Always onions. Vendors wave at you, nod, or in some cases, very deliberately ignore you. That's how you know you're doing your job right. You're not here to be loved. You're here to be heard. Whether it's about grain quotas or public urination fines, someone's always unhappy about something you said. But it's not really you they hate. It's the message. That's what you tell yourself, anyway. Back in the square, you prepare for the afternoon round. That's when you ring for smaller news, local disputes, lost property, and the town's version of entertainment. A prize hen is missing. The baker's apprentice has been arrested for fighting with a goose. Things that matter to the people, even if the king doesn't care. You lift your bell again and let it ring twice, pausing for dramatic effect. Hear ye, hear ye. Let it be known that a fine white goose, belonging to Mistress Ida of the East Lane, has gone astray. It answers to the name Flossy, and is fond of spitting. This draws a few chuckles, which is good for morale. Kind of informal celebrity. Of course, the bell isn't always funny. It's often feared. In many towns, the bell meant news you didn't want to hear. Executions, deaths, fires, or worse, new taxes. But the bell also brought information in times of chaos. It gave people direction during plague outbreaks, flood evacuations, and surprise bishop visits. It cut through panic like a knife through curd. You think of the time the river rose 3 feet overnight and flooded the lower streets. No one could hear each other over the roar of water and panicked livestock, except you. You stood on a cider barrel and rang the bell until your arm went numb, bellowing for people to head uphill. You don't often get thanked. That day, a child hugged your leg and gave you a slightly chewed piece of boiled sugar root. You still count it as one of the highest honors of your career. There's a myth in town that if the bell ever breaks, the town itself will fall apart. It's nonsense, of course. Probably started by the blacksmith's apprentice, who sells replacement handles. Still, there's something oddly sacred about the bell. You polish it. You speak to it when no one's listening. It's the only tool that makes people stop and pay attention to you, a luxury most peasants never experience. Not all bells are alike. Some criers used small, sharp-sounding bells that could cut across a crowd. Others preferred deep-toned ones that echoed like a church chime. You've heard of criers in Florence who used gongs instead, and one guy in Krakow who reportedly used a horn carved from a donkey's femur. Historians still argue whether that was ceremonial or just poor acoustics. Your own bell is a medium-tone, iron-cast beauty. Not too shrill, not too mournful. Just enough noise to make people wince, but not flee. You sometimes wonder what it would be like if the bell did mean something else. If it were used to call for weddings or dances instead of debt collection and latrine regulations. But that's not your role. You're not a minstrel or a matchmaker. You are the sound before the storm, the voice before the silence. You're also, technically, a legal document. Here's the thing people forget. When you announce an official order in public, with at least 2 witnesses, that announcement carries the same weight as a written decree. It's legally binding. Your voice holds legal authority, as long as you don't improvise too much. That's why you rehearse every line so carefully. If you mess up and say Tuesday instead of Thursday, the wrong people might show up to pay their pig tax, and suddenly you've got chaos and swine all over the street. That's also why the bell comes before the words. It acts as a signal, a trigger. Once you ring it, what you say next becomes real, like a verbal contract. The bell is the notary public of noise. Some criers get theatrical with it. You've seen men twirl their bells like batons, pause dramatically before reading, even bow between items. You're not quite that fancy. You believe in a firm stance, a steady delivery, and just a hint of sarcasm, especially when announcing things like new laws regarding the wearing of pointy shoes on holy days. There's an art to knowing when to pause, when to raise your voice, and when to let silence hang. Too fast, and people miss the point. Too slow, and they start throwing apples. Not long ago, a traveling scholar came through town and asked to study your oral delivery. You thought he meant your teeth. Turns out, he was analyzing how the rhythm of a crier's voice affects retention of information. Apparently, people remember the second item you say more than the first or third. So now you sandwich the boring stuff, like fencing permits, between the juicy bits, like salacious arrests or missing goats. Your final message of the afternoon is brief, but important. A warning about a traveling charlatan claiming to sell miracle tonics. Says it'll cure baldness, gout, and heartbreak. You read, but it's mostly vinegar and lies. You can't help but grin as the fishmonger yells. Sounds like my ex-wife. Laughter follows you as you move on, bell at your side. The day fades toward dusk, and your voice is tired, but not broken. You've survived another round. And tomorrow, they'll hear you again, whether they like it or not. Your clothes are ridiculous. No, really, look at yourself. In a world where most people wear the same undyed linen tunic day after day, you're walking around dressed like a theatrical peacock who lost a bet. Scarlet and navy sash, gold-trimmed cuffs, a feathered hat that wobbles like a drunk rooster. It's not optional either. The town requires you to wear this uniform when delivering official proclamations. Why? Because visibility matters. You're a walking news alert, and people need to spot you before they hear you. The outfit, gaudy as it is, actually carries legal authority. It signals that you're acting on behalf of the crown, the mayor, or whatever governing body you serve. If someone assaults you while you're dressed in your livery, that's a crime against the state, not just a personal squabble. Of course, that hasn't stopped the occasional rotten turnip from flying your way, but it does give you a little extra confidence, or at least plausible deniability. You adjust your hat in the reflection of a rain barrel. The feather is drooping. Again, that blasted thing absorbs moisture like a sponge. It started off as ostrich, allegedly, but by now it could be goose, duck, or something the tailor found stuck to a barn roof. The sash, meanwhile, is stiff with old sweat and ceremonial starch. You're supposed to keep it pristine, But that's a joke. You've cried through thunderstorms, market stampedes, and a rather ill-fated midsummer cheese fight. Once, a cow sneezed on your mid-announcement. That sash has seen things. Still, you wear it with a kind of pride, because it does mean something. It sets you apart from the crowd, not in wealth or station, but in function. You aren't just another face in the muddy blur. You are the voice of authority, however begrudgingly heard. In some towns, criers even had a coat of arms, usually a variation on the town's own, with a bell or scroll included. That kind of official symbolism helps cement the crier's role as a civic instrument, not just a guy who shouts about duck laws. You remember once hearing about a town in France where the crier's hat was said to be cursed. Anyone else who wore it would lose their voice within a day. That may have just been the crier's clever way of keeping nosy kids from borrowing it, but still, historians still argue whether there was a real superstition or just one very protective crier with a flair for drama. Back in your town, the uniform also gets you into places other folks can't go. You've wandered through noble courtyards, the back rooms of taverns, and once, very awkwardly, a convent hallway where they mistook you for a bishop's messenger. You didn't correct them until you were halfway through announcing a bake sale. Sometimes, you wonder how different your job would be if the uniform wasn't required. If you could just shout from a corner in your undershirt and be done with it. But you know better. The outfit draws eyes. It commands attention. In a way, it is part of the message. There's something almost theatrical about the whole thing. You're a one-person show, costume and all. You've got your props, bell, scroll, sometimes a walking stick if your hip is acting up. And you've got your lines. Every day is a new script, written by scribes and nobles, performed by you. There was a time when criers even had backup singers. No joke. Some festivals featured town bands that played short flourishes between announcements. A trumpet blast here, a drumbeat there. Just enough to make things festive. Those days are mostly gone now. Cutbacks, you're told. But you sometimes imagine what it would feel like to cry out a tax hike with a violin crescendo behind you. Might soften the blow. Of course, not everyone dresses like you. Criers in different regions wore wildly different uniforms. Some wore powdered wigs. Others wore robes. A few even dressed in near-military fashion, complete with polished boots and epaulets. You once heard that in the Low Countries, a town crier wore wooden shoes, a full woolen cloak, and a hat shaped like a fish. Historians still argue whether that last part is true or just poetic exaggeration from a Flemish poet who'd had too much cider. You, however, have the classic English look. Tunic, sash, hat, and the ever-present bell. It's not glamorous, but it's consistent. It marks you as part of a long tradition. When children see you, they know news is coming. When elders see you, they know to brace for bad news, or occasionally, news of a royal wedding and the associated day off. There's also a tactical advantage to your costume. No one mistakes you for a thief. Even guards nod as you pass, assuming you're on official business. And when a merchant tries to sell you bad fruit, all you have to do is say, "Would you like me to announce that?" That usually gets you a better apple. As you make your rounds, you feel the stares, some admiring, others amused, but all focused. And that's the point. You are the center of brief, necessary attention in a world without mass communication. No printing presses, no telegraphs, no town-wide notices unless you carry them. It's a lot of pressure for someone whose hat keeps catching the wind and flopping into his eyes. Still, you adjust your sash, brush off a splash of mud, and keep walking. You've got another set of proclamations to deliver before dusk, and a town full of people who would absolutely love to say they didn't hear it. But thanks to your bell, your voice, and yes, your ridiculous outfit, they definitely will. The parchment in your hand feels heavier than usual, not because of its weight. It's the same cheap stuff the scribe always uses, but because of what's written on it. Today, you're reading a royal proclamation, and that means zero improvisation, zero jokes, and zero margin for error. You take a deep breath and reread the lines under your breath, lips barely moving as you trace each word with your finger. The phrasing is formal, dense, and unnervingly vague. Something about trade tariffs, a noble title reassignment, and, of course, a new church tax that will absolutely thrill no one. When you deliver the town's business, you can soften the tone, maybe throw in a joke or two, but not with royal orders. These come with a seal and a warning. There's a phrase written right at the bottom. To alter this decree is to deny His Majesty's will, which is fancy talk for say this exactly or end up in the stocks, or worse. So you stand in the center of the square, straighten your sash, and ring your bell. Once, twice, sharply. The sound slices through the early afternoon, buzz like a knife through overripe cheese. People look up. Conversations fade. Even the blacksmith's hammer pauses mid-swing. You unfold the parchment and begin. Hear ye, hear ye. By decree of His Majesty King Edward, sealed this 14th day of Michaelmas, let it be known that. And just like that, the town stops breathing. You continue, carefully enunciating every syllable. A noble title is being revoked. Land is being reassigned. Someone who used to be powerful is about to have a very bad day, and everyone knows it. A few people glance at one another. There's tension in the air now, not because of what's being said, necessarily, but because you are saying it. You, the crier, hold the words of the king in your hands, in your lungs, on your tongue. It's power, not your power, but a borrowed, dangerous kind, like holding a torch over a pile of dry hay. One gust of wind, and everything's on fire. You've read proclamations like this before. You've announced property seizures, nobles shaming, even military drafts. Each time, you've watched people's faces change, their futures shift, their trust crack a little more. And still you do it, because it's your job, and because someone has to. Town criers weren't just human megaphones. You were agents of state authority, people trusted or feared. You're not for who you were, but for whose words you carried. You were the living extension of a system most people barely understood. And yet, you've also seen that same system forget its cry the moment the message ends. One time, you read a particularly unpopular decree about bread price controls. The crowd erupted. You hadn't written the policy. You didn't benefit from it. But you were the one standing there, holding the scroll. They shouted at you like you were the baker, the mayor, and the king all rolled into one. Someone threw a stale roll at your knee. You limped for a week. Since then, you've developed strategies. You read difficult announcements quickly, with a neutral tone. You avoid eye contact with the cheese sellers, especially when tariffs are involved. And if you ever see old man Bram reaching into his vegetable cart during a decree, you duck. Still, there's pride in doing it right, in nailing every clause, every henceforth and heretofore. There's a rhythm to royal decrees, like a complicated poem that kicks you in the teeth if you misread it. And today you finish cleanly. As witnessed and sealed by the royal chancellor's hand, this order shall take effect at sunrise on the morrow. God save the king. You lower the parchment. The crowd is silent. Then someone claps. Once, dryly, probably sarcastically. A few murmurs ripple out, but no one throws anything, and no one yells. It's a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. Later that day, you're called to the mayor's hall. He offers you a lukewarm mug of ale and nods approvingly. Handled it well, he mutters. Didn't start a riot. That's more than we hoped. You nod and say thank you, even though your hands are still shaking slightly from holding that cursed scroll. On the way out, you remember something Thomas, your predecessor, once told you. Announcing for the king is like singing at a bear. If you hit the right note, he dances. If you mess up, you get eaten. Either way, you're the one who has to open your mouth first. Historians still argue whether town criers were ever held legally accountable for misreading royal proclamations. Some claim errors were forgiven. Others insist punishment could be severe. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, which is right where you try to stay. As you walk home, your voice is tired. Not just your throat, but your voice. The part of you that carries the weight of authority, of expectation, of danger. It hums under your ribs like a coiled bell string. You stop by the tavern, take off your sash. and drink something warm and sweet. The innkeeper asks what you read today. You shrug and say, the usual. King says jump. We land wherever we can. And then, quietly, you hum the cadence of the decree to yourself. You didn't stumble. You didn't stammer. You survived another day speaking on behalf of people who don't know your name. You may not get remembered in history books, but today, your voice carried the king. The hanging bell on your belt jingles, faintly, as you step through puddles left by last night's rain. You're heading toward the old scaffold, the grimest of your regular stops. Gallows Hill. No executions today. Thank heavens, but the association lingers. The wood still smells of rope oil and mildew, and even the birds avoid perching on it. Today's assignment is grim. You're delivering a death notice. Not a trial. Not a public punishment. Just a message. Quiet, cold, and final. The parchment feels different when it carries the weight of someone's end. Even the ink looks darker, like it knows the words it's forming are heavy. You read it once to yourself, then again with your hand over your heart. It's someone you knew. Not a friend, exactly, but a familiar face. A stable boy who got too close to a sick mule and never recovered. This is part of the job, too. You clear your throat, take your place at the edge of the scaffold, and let the bell ring once, low and slow. Hear ye, hear ye. You begin, quieter than usual. Let it be known that Colin of the South Stables has passed on the feast of St. Dunstan, following a grave and sudden illness. His belongings shall be turned over to the steward, and his debts cleared under the mercy statute. People pause. No gasps, no sobbing. Just a beat of collective silence, like the town itself is exhaling. You think back to every time you've had to do this. The plague years were the worst. Sometimes you'd announce 5, 6 names in one breath. You stopped looking at their faces. You stopped letting it in. That's the only way to keep doing it without falling apart. But still, some names stay with you. Like the little girl who was trampled during the maypole race. Or the beekeeper who mistook a noble's horse for his own. Or that one poor fellow who slipped off the roof while painting a weather vane shaped like a fish. You don't say those stories aloud. They live in the spaces between the bell strikes. There's an odd ritualism to death announcements. You must say the name clearly, state the cause if known, and note any legal implications. It sounds bureaucratic, and it is, but it's also a kind of mourning. A weirdly public way to say goodbye, and you're the one tasked with giving that moment shape. Not everyone appreciates it. Some accuse you of being too cold. Others say it's ghoulish. But without the crier, the dead would pass without record. Most people don't have tombstones. Few can afford a priest. But everyone hears you. You try to read their names with dignity, even when their deaths were undignified. Especially then. There's a phrase criers use when they're training apprentices. Speak the dead as if they're listening. And maybe they are. You don't know, but it helps. One time, a woman approached you after reading. Her brother had died in a field accident. She just wanted to know how you pronounced his name. Was it clean? She asked. Did you speak it clean? You had, but it was the first time you realized that what you say isn't just a message. It's a memory, and people will remember how you say it. You also read other grim news. Executions, missing persons, plagues. Disease announcements are the trickiest. You're supposed to be calm, but not soothing. Clear, but not terrifying. During the pox outbreak, you perfected the tone. Factual, gentle, distant. You read like a man listing dry goods, but with the weight of a church bell. You remember one afternoon when you had to announce a mass grave being dug just outside the east wall. A pile of firewood nearby caught fire, and the smoke drifted across the square just as you said the word unclaimed. The image stuck. You couldn't eat for 2 days. And still, people expect you to smile the next morning when you announce a fish sale. That's the oddest thing about your job. You switch between tragedy and comedy in minutes. You might tell the town that someone's passed, then immediately follow with a lost chicken or a change in sausage regulation. It's jarring, but reflects life, especially medieval life, where joy and disaster lived side by side, like cranky neighbors. Some criers, especially in Italy, split the duties. One would announce the deaths, the other everything else. Historians still argue whether this was for dignity or simply vocal preservation. Either way, you handle both. You don't have the luxury of delegation. After today's announcement, you walk to the bakery. The scent of flour and yeast hits you like a blanket. The baker hands you a day-old roll and nods, solemnly. You nod back. No words are needed. He heard you. And that's something else people forget. Being heard, truly heard, is its own kind of memorial. By dusk, you've scrubbed your hands 3 times. You still feel the words clinging to your palms. You drink your evening tea, voice sore, back aching, soul a little heavier than usual. But you showed up. You rang the bell. You said the name. And now, that boy from the South Stables will not be forgotten. By midweek, your voice is running on fumes and honey. You sound like a very polite thunderstorm, rough, but still civil. You've already cried out 5 notices today, ranging from a broken town gate to an escaped goat that is, for the record, armed with a belligerent temperament and 2 cracked horns. You made the goat announcement theatrical, naturally, gave it a pirate accent. The children howled. One of them saluted you. But now comes the fun part. Because while the pay is modest and the weather is rarely kind, being a town crier does come with certain fringe benefits. Not written into the job, mind you, but deeply understood by everyone in town. You're something between a local celebrity, a municipal watchdog, and an emotional support bureaucrat. Take today, for example. You're wandering back through the market square when the innkeeper's wife calls out. "Oi, come in for a pint then." On the house. You glance around like she might be talking to someone else. She isn't. You step inside and set your bell gently on the table beside you. Not everyone can get a free pint just by showing up, but you can. You're the reason the inn wasn't fined last spring for hosting a midnight dice game. After all, you forgot to mention it in your morning announcements. Must have slipped your mind. The ale is lukewarm, but blessedly smooth. Your throat relaxes instantly. A passing bard raises his mug in your direction. To the bellman, he toasts, who tells us how to live, and sometimes even how to find our trousers. It's not entirely inaccurate, because in addition to news, you're also the town's unofficial lost and found, birthday announcer, and gossip moderator. If someone loses a mule, you know about it. If someone's celebrating a 50th wedding anniversary, they've probably slipped you a halfpenny to mention it with flair. Once, you even got bribed with 2 smoked eels to not mention someone's scandalous cart mishap in front of the church. You accepted, of course. No one wants eel on their conscience. You're not corrupt, just flexible. Officially, criers are paid by the town council or the Lord's manor, depending on jurisdiction. But unofficially, you get tips. You get favors. You get strange gifts. A turnip shaped like a duck. A loaf of bread still warm from the oven. A handmade belt buckle with a crudely etched bell on it. All tokens of appreciation, or subtle bribes to keep you sweet. In one town you visited long ago, a crier was given a small cottage rent-free, so long as he only spoke truth, and never on Tuesdays. You never found out what was so terrible about Tuesdays. Your town isn't quite that generous, but they do exempt you from most taxes. You don't pay for stalls if you want to sell something, though what you'd sell is a mystery. Bells, rumors. You tried hawking poems once, but only a local goat herder bought one, and he promptly ate it. Then there's the food. You get invited to feasts you weren't technically asked to announce. People feel better when you're around. It's like having the newspaper sitting at the table. The mayor's late again, someone might say. Oh, but the crier's here, so at least the wine's real. There's a superstition in some towns that sharing a drink with the crier brings good luck, or that if you make the crier laugh, your crops will grow better. You suspect these were started by criers themselves, centuries ago, but you're not about to correct anyone. Of course, all this privilege comes with a catch. You're also everyone's confidant. The butcher's apprentice wants advice on courting the baker's daughter. The cooper's wife suspects her husband of stealing barrels from himself. The priest is worried his sermons are getting boring, and asks you, if you can announce them with a little more flair. You become the town sponge, soaking in secrets, sopping up tension, all while pretending you don't know that the runaway goat from this morning was actually just a poorly disguised exit for a romantic elopement. In return, you get access. People open their doors for you, let you sleep by the hearth if you're too tired to walk home, slip you scraps of food wrapped in cloth with notes that read, "Thank you for not saying it was my goose." Not to mention, you have free reign of the best ale in town if you know who to compliment. The brewer loves being mentioned, so you throw in an extra well-loved or rich in taste whenever you announce his license renewals. The result? Never an empty mug. Still, there's a line you don't cross. You never alter official messages, and you don't take bribes for silence on serious matters. You're not a fool. People talk, and the gallows aren't just decorative, but in the gray areas between announcements, between legal and social, you're a master navigator. And every now and then, it pays off in the most surprising ways, like the time a noble's messenger lost a sealed scroll in the market. You found it, returned it without a word, and a week later, a sack of fine cloth appeared on your doorstep. No note, just a feather tucked inside the folds. Tonight, as you finish your drink and step back into the square, your voice feels steadier. The ale helped. So did the laughter. You ring your bell once, not for an announcement, but out of habit, and someone cheers from a window. He's still at it. You grin, because yes, you're still at it. And tomorrow, when the bell rings again, the town will gather, grumble, gossip, and listen. By the time you make it home, if you can call your rented loft above the cooper's shop home, your feet are blistered, your throat is sore, and your arms feel like you've been wrestling barrels all day, which, ironically, is exactly what Cooper does, and he still manages to look cheerful. You suspect witchcraft, or very supportive shoes. You pull off your sash with a practiced tug and hang it from the same nail where your bell rests each night. There's a ritual to this. Bell off, sash off, tunic unbelted, kettle on. The rhythm of it is oddly comforting, like tucking your voice into bed for the night. You lean over the small brazier and drop a pinch of thyme into your cup. You don't have honey today. Used the last of it after Tuesday's livestock curfew announcement. Left your voice sounding like a toad gargling gravel. But the herbs help. A little. From the window, you watch the rooftops fade into silhouette. Smoke rises in soft spirals from chimneys. A cat slinks across the eaves like it owns the place, which, to be fair, it might. You're not entirely sure it hasn't been collecting rent from the pigeons. You reflect, not for the first time, on how strange it is that you've lasted this long in a job so physically punishing, so publicly exposed. Most criers burn out. They lose their voices, or their patience, or their knees. You've seen it happen. You once replaced a man who lost his voice halfway through a plague proclamation and ended up working as a chimney sweep. Not a graceful transition, but you've endured, you've adapted, and that might be the strangest thing of all, because this isn't a role you were born into. Most people think criers come from families of officials, scribes, or court messengers, but you were a potboy, a stable cleaner, a third son with no inheritance and no plan. You were chosen not because of who you were, but because of how loud you yelled when the ale cart nearly crushed your foot. True story. The mayor overheard your scream, turned his head, and muttered, "That's a voice that carries." 3 weeks later, you were holding a bell and reading a parchment about seasonal eel limitations to a crowd of indifferent farmers. You didn't even know how to read properly at first. You learned by repetition, mimicking the scribes like a parrot until the shapes of letters made sense. Eventually, you began to write your own notes, annotate margins, and once even composed a wedding announcement in rhyming couplets. People still bring that one up. The skill of reading aloud, really reading aloud, is its own discipline. You've learned where to breathe, where to pause, where to let the silence speak louder than the bell ever could. You've come to see each announcement not as a chore, but as a miniature performance, kind of spoken dance that keeps the town turning just a little smoother. There's a quiet pride in that. A crier once told you, People don't remember the parchment. They remember the voice that carried it. He's long gone now, retired to a fishing village, or maybe eaten by wolves. Accounts differ, but the word stuck with you. You wonder sometimes what your legacy will be. Will anyone remember you 20 years after you're gone? Will the town build a statue of the man who once announced a midnight cheese heist and got applause for his dramatic delivery? Probably not. But maybe, just maybe, they'll remember the sound of your bell, the way it echoed off the stone walls in the square, the way it called people together, even when they didn't want to hear what you had to say. And if not, that's all right too. You didn't become a crier for the glory. You did it because someone needed to stand in the middle of the storm and speak. And speak you did. You lie down on your straw mattress, bones creaking in concert. The roof leaks a little, but only when it rains hard. The feather in your hat still smells faintly of roasted onions from lunch. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow. Just before sleep takes you, you hear something outside, the faint ting of a bell, way off in the dark. Not yours. A child's toy, perhaps, or someone trying to mimic your rhythm. You smile. Even in rest, the bell carries on. You wake before sunrise to the sound of bells, church bells this time, not your own. They toll slow and deep, marking the feast of St. Crispin, a holy day, which means a slightly shorter announcement list, slightly longer sermons, and a significantly higher chance of being pelted with breadcrumbs by bored altar boys. You dress quietly, pulling on your slightly damp tunic and looping your sash over one shoulder. The morning air smells like smoke, wet moss, and porridge, three things that somehow always smell better outside than in. You grab your bell, test its weight in your hand, and step into the dawn. Today is one of those rare moments when your voice takes a supporting role. Religious feasts belong to the priests, but even they rely on you to wrangle the townsfolk, get them in line, and remind them, firmly but politely, not to bring dogs into the sanctuary. You've made that announcement 3 times this month already. You station yourself just outside the chapel steps and ring the bell once, softly, almost reverently. Hear ye, hear ye. Let all those of sound body and pious heart gather now for the Mass of St. Crispin. Blessings to the cobblers, the tanners, and the stitchers, whose patron watches their hands. People shuffle in, some still tying their belts, others yawning behind gloved hands. A child tries to ring your bell while your back is turned, but you give him a look that says, "I've thrown shoes at men twice your size." Inside, the sermon drones on. You stay near the door, part sentry, part observer. Occasionally, someone sneaks out early, claiming a stomach ailment or urgent cow business. You don't stop them. Your job isn't to judge, it's to notice. And you notice everything. That's another part of the gig most people don't see. Criers are unofficial chroniclers. You witness things. You file away names and events like loose scrolls in the back of your mind. Births, arguments, lost shoes, rain patterns. You've seen noblemen lie through their teeth and peasants weep over debts. You've heard whispered rumors before they grow legs, and outright lies delivered with tear-streaked sincerity. You hold the shape of the town in your memory, even as it changes beneath your feet. You once spotted a thief by the way he avoided listening to your announcement. Everyone else was grumbling about the new market toll. He looked too eager to be somewhere else. You whispered a warning to the baker, and by sunset, the fellow was halfway to the next town with nothing but stolen copper and a goat that didn't even like him. Later that day, the mayor said, "You'd have made a fine spy." Maybe, but you'd rather cry truth than whisper lies. Still, your job to straddle the line between what is known and what is shared. You're the bottleneck. All town information has to pass through your lungs before it reaches the masses. That kind of role has power, quiet, unspoken power. And sometimes, people try to exploit that. You've had scribes slip in messages that weren't approved. You've had merchants offer editing fees to downplay fines or make their wares sound more exciting. You even had a widow ask you to announce her availability like she was livestock. You declined, of course, with tact and a cookie. Maintaining integrity is exhausting. You could have made twice your salary by now just bending the truth in small ways. But once your word loses weight, your voice becomes noise. Just another man yelling in a square. You've always believed that the truth should echo. That's what the bell is for. After Mass, you post a few public notices on the town board, a weathered slab of wood near the well. One reads, "All dogs must be tethered during feast processions." Another warns of a suspicious peddler with unusual buttons. The third is an official reminder not to throw scraps at the visiting bishop, even if he looks like a ham in a hat. You're pretty sure the mayor added that last part as a joke. You read it anyway. There's a quiet satisfaction in seeing people read the words you've already said aloud, like a second ripple across the pond. In a world without printing presses, public notices are rare and precious. Half the town can't even read, but the other half reads to them. The messages still spread. Your voice still carries. You wander back to the square, passing stalls, just now being set up. Someone waves you over and offers you a slice of sweetbread for your trouble. You don't ask what trouble she means. You accept it with a wink. As the sun rises higher, your duties wind down for the day. Holy days are light in workload, but heavy in observation. You learn more in one morning of idle standing than most people do in a week. You see the boy with the sling hiding a cracked apple behind his back. You see the merchant's wife exchange a glance with the apothecary. You see the beggar at the edge of the square not asking for coin today, just sitting, watching, maybe remembering something, maybe waiting for someone. You sit beside him, bell quiet in your hand. You don't speak. You just sit. Because sometimes the town doesn't need to hear from you. It just needs to know you're there. You didn't plan to be involved in a manhunt today. That sort of thing isn't usually listed in your morning proclamations. But by the time the baker's boy came sprinting down the street, yelling something about stolen rings and a missing servant girl, you already knew. Today was going to be louder than usual. The mayor finds you before breakfast, panting red-faced, with an urgent scroll in one hand and a half-buttoned doublet flapping behind him. She's gone, he wheezes. Took the jewelry. Left through the tannery gate. I need the whole town listening. You nod grimly, take the scroll, and ring your bell. Once, twice, 3 times. Sharp, demanding. It works. Heads snap toward you like sunflowers to the sun. The town knows the sound by now. This isn't a market tax or a goose raffle. This is serious. You raise the scroll and bellow in your clearest tone. Hear ye, hear ye. Let it be known throughout the borough and its surrounding fields that one Miss Breda of Oak Hollow is wanted for the theft of 3 silver rings, a lacquer hair comb, and 1 velvet glove belonging to the household of Mayor Aldwin. Murmurs ripple. You see people exchange knowing glances. Others tilt their heads in disbelief. You continue. She is 20 years of age, light-haired, often wearing a green kerchief. She was last seen fleeing near the West Tannery. Anyone aiding her will face charges equal to the crime. Anyone providing information will receive 2 shillings and the mayor's commendation. You lower the scroll and scan the crowd. It's already begun. Whispers, speculations, lies blooming like weeds in a garden. Someone's muttering about witchcraft. Someone else about love gone wrong. Rita's name is no longer a person. It's a storm cloud. This is the other side of your role. Crowd control. You don't just speak news. You shape the reaction. It's a responsibility that weighs heavier than your sash. You've seen how one word, mispronounced or misread, can start a panic. How the wrong tone can turn suspicion into fury. You once had to clarify that infected sheep meant sheep with ticks, not plague. The distinction saved at least 3 flocks from being burned. And today's announcement has that same charged potential. One wrong phrase and Breda becomes a witch, a seductress, or a symbol of something she never chose to be. You can already hear the blacksmith muttering. Knew she'd run someday. He's lying. He's just upset she beat his nephew at cards last week. Historians still argue whether Criers bore legal responsibility for inciting crowds. Some believe they did. Others claim the words belonged to the sender, not the messenger. You, personally, know better. The moment it leaves your lips, it becomes yours. You stay near the square, repeating the proclamation every hour, not because the town didn't hear it the first time, but because hearing it again cements it. Memory, repetition, familiarity, these are your tools. Midday brings a strange twist. A boy approaches you. 10 years old, maybe, cheeks smudged with soot. He tugged your sleeve and whispers, "Brita gave me this." He holds up a note. It's folded oddly, like a triangle. You glance around, then quickly open it. One sentence, scribbled in haste. I didn't take the glove. I only took what was mine. You fold it, quietly pocket it. Then you say something you've never said before. Go home, boy. You've done enough. Because now the message is muddled. It's not just theft. It's a story. Maybe a grievance. Maybe revenge. Maybe justice, depending on who's telling it. You announce the notice one more time that afternoon, but this time, you soften your voice. You leave out the phrase wanted for theft and say instead, being sought for questioning. No one corrects you, and in that moment, you realize, not every proclamation is set in stone. Some are etched in chalk. Some are drawn in sand, waiting for a breeze. And sometimes, you are the breeze. By dusk, Brita hasn't been found. But the town has cooled. The panic has turned to curiosity. And you've done your part to keep blood from boiling over. You stop by the mayor's office to deliver your report. You mention the note, but not the boy. He's too young to be dragged into grown-up disputes. The mayor scowls, mutters something about disloyal servants, then dismisses you. Back outside, the air feels lighter. You walk slowly, belt tucked into your cloak, mind replaying the day's events. You wonder if Brita is hiding nearby, if she heard your softened voice, if she'll ever come back. You sit on your usual bench, beneath the twisted elm, and let your feet rest. A cart trundles by. Someone's whistling a harvest song. You're tired, but proud. Today, you weren't just a crier. You were a filter, a judge, a protector, a whisper standing between the town and its anger, and you didn't let the whisper break. The rain returns overnight, drumming on your roof like 1,000 tiny fists trying to shake loose your sleep. By morning, the world is soaked. Mud creeps into the edges of your boots before you've even reached the square, and your hat has surrendered completely. It now resembles a soggy pastry more than a symbol of office. But duty calls, even when your socks squelch. Today, you're headed to the bridge, the wooden one. The one that sways a little too much when the wind catches it just right. Someone's reported damage to one of its supports, and you've been asked to inform the public in a manner that discourages panic stampeding. No pressure. You arrive just as a wheelbarrow full of turnips attempts a bold crossing, only to topple sideways halfway across. The turnips scatter like startled chickens, and the barrow's owner lets out a creative stream of invective that absolutely doesn't count as a prayer to St. Cuthbert. You sigh, ring your bell, and step forward. Hear ye, you declare, holding your arms wide to quiet the scene. Due to water damage and a suspicious creaking sound described as the groan of a dying whale, the Eastwood Bridge shall be closed until further notice. All travelers are urged to use the stone crossing near the mill pond, unless you fancy swimming with eels. A chuckle rolls through the small crowd, precisely what you were aiming for. Humor softens panic. It turns danger into inconvenience, which is something people are far better equipped to handle. This is a skill you've honed over the years, how to deliver bad news gently, without diluting its seriousness. You once had to announce the collapse of a granary roof. No one was hurt, thankfully, but the grain was ruined. You still remember the line you used. We regret to inform you that your next loaf of bread may be airier than intended. Got a laugh. Got the point across. Got 3 loaves for free. You didn't start out with this instinct. Early in your career, you were too blunt, too loud. You once used the phrase rampaging illness when describing a minor fever outbreak. A dozen people fled to the forest with nothing but cured meats and anxiety. Now you're more careful. You read the room. You measure your tone. You speak with the confidence of someone who knows the town will take your word as law, but the empathy of someone who knows they didn't ask for any of this. Sometimes you're a counselor. Other times, you're just weatherproof wallpaper. Today, after the bridge closure, you're approached by one of the town's oldest residents, old Tess. She doesn't speak much, but when she does, people listen. She tugs your sleeve, looks up at you with watery eyes, and says, "My grandson was born on that bridge." You smile softly. "Then I'll make sure it's still standing when he has his." She nods once and walks off. Little moments like that aren't written in scrolls. They're not part of the proclamations, but they're real, and they remind you that your job isn't just to speak. It's to be heard. Later that morning, you're called to the guild hall. A rare invitation. The scribes there want your opinion on how best to announce a new apprentice tax. They've written 3 drafts, each somehow worse than the last. You suggest a 4th, one that explains the reason behind the tax, repairs to the town granary again, and offers a small incentive. Apprentices will be listed on the guild's official register. Public recognition. A bit of pride. Suddenly, the tax feels like an honor, or at least not an insult. The scribes blink at you like you've just spoken in tongues. One finally says, "You ever thought of joining the council?" You laugh so hard your bell nearly falls off the table. "No, thank you," you reply. "I already have the best seat in the house. It just doesn't come with a cushion." On your way out, you announce the revised tax to a crowd by the bakery. A few groans, a few shrugs, but no shouting. That's a win. You pass the smithy, where a boy with a bent nail is trying to fix a sandal strap. You crouch, show him the proper angle to hammer it. He watches you like you're made of gold. You leave him with a wink and a "Don't tell your father I helped. He still owes me a shoe buckle." By evening, the rain has slowed to a mist. You return to the bridge, now cordoned off with a rope and a helpful sign. Cross at your own peril, but do try to cross somewhere else. You didn't write it, but you inspired it, and that's another strange pleasure of your role. You start to hear your own cadence echo in others. Little jokes, little turns of phrase. The town starts to speak more like you, and you wonder, just briefly, what the town will sound like long after your voice is gone. Tonight, you've been summoned to the hall for a private task. Not a proclamation, not a crisis, something stranger. The Baron has requested a performance. That's the word the steward used. "Performance," he said, eyes darting like a weasel near an open pantry. "His lordship is hosting guests from out of town and would like to hear what it is you do." You blinked. "He wants me to cry." "No, no," the steward replied, flustered. "Not cry, just announce. Recite. Entertain." You sighed and packed your bell. This is not your usual territory. By twilight, you're standing in the stone-floored banquet chamber, lit by torchlight and filled with perfumed nobles. Most of them are too powdered to show emotion. The Baron sits slouched like a well-fed lizard, swirling his wine and barely feigning interest. You are, apparently, the entertainment between the roast goose and the jugglers. You clear your throat, ring your bell once, not too loudly, not here, and begin. "Hear ye, noble guests of Wintredge Hall. May your wines stay sweet, your geese remain roasted, and your belts mercifully loose." There's a faint chuckle. One noble smirks. Good start. You launch into a dramatic retelling of the Great Sausage Dispute, an actual event from 3 springs ago when 2 vendors came to blows over the alleged theft of a spice blend. You had to announce the truce conditions, which included a public tasting and a duel fought with ladles. It was, frankly, the most fun you've ever had while shouting at people. You tell the story with flair, pacing like a bard, hamming up the accents, miming the ladle clash with exaggerated drama. When you get to the punchline, and thus the disputed sausage was declared communal property and consumed by a passing dog, you get real laughter. Not forced, not polite. Actual laughter. Even the Baron snorts into his goblet. Afterward, one of the guests, a young noblewoman with ink-stained fingers, approaches you. "You're better than any court fool I've seen," she says. "Have you ever considered performing elsewhere?" You shake your head. I announce, "That's different from performing." She studies you for a moment. not as different as you think. You don't know what to make of that. Later, as you're walking home in the dark, torchlight flickering against the cobbles, you think about it more. What is the difference? After all, you perform every day. Every bell ring, every pause, every shift in tone, it's all part of a practiced craft. You might be delivering grain shortages or sheep theft reports, but you're still shaping words, guiding emotion, controlling tempo. A chord gesture gets applause. You get compliance. Arguably, yours is the harder job, but you've always resisted the idea that you're an actor, because actors can lie. Actors take on masks. You're supposed to be the voice of truth. Still, there's truth in performance, too, isn't there? You remember your predecessor, old Thomas, leaning in over a pint to whisper. People don't just want the news. They want the shape of the news. You give it to them. He was right. You don't just recite. You interpret. You guide the mood of the town with nothing but breath and syllables. And that's not something just anyone can do. Not the mayor. Not the priests. Not even the baron. You. Historians still debate the status of criers in court life, whether they were ever considered entertainers or strictly municipal servants. You suspect it was both. A town's voice isn't bound by parchment. It echoes through markets and banquets alike. And tonight you echoed. As you reach your loft, your bell clinks faintly in your hand. You glance up at the stars. One's especially bright tonight, hanging just over the steeple. You whisper to it, just to see how your voice carries. No one replies, of course, but the sound feels good, clear, like breath on cold glass. You hang your bell by the window this time, where it catches a bit of starlight. A reward, perhaps, for proving it can shine in more places than just a muddy town square. Tomorrow, you'll be back to curfews and lost hens. But tonight, you were more than a crier. You were the town's soul in a room full of silk, and you made them laugh. It's laundry day. Not a glamorous start to your story, but no tale worth hearing begins with polished shoes and fresh breath. You've wrestled your tunic into a half-cleaned heap, scrubbed the mud off your sash again, and hung your socks over a fence post like two very limp flags of surrender. Your bell, carefully wiped with oil, gleams faintly in the morning light. You're tired, not sleepy tired, soul tired, the kind of tired that builds after years of standing in the cold, lifting your voice against wind and indifference, always being on. There's no mask to wear when you're the crier, no hiding behind titles. Your voice is your face. And today, your face wants a nap. But you don't get one, because the moment you sit down, a boy from the west gate bolts toward you, cheeks flushed and eyes wide. There's been a fire, he shouts. The baker's roof. You've got to tell him. And just like that, the socks stay on the fence post. You don't complain. You don't hesitate. You grab your bell and start walking. The fire's already out when you arrive, thankfully. A blackened stretch of roof smolders above the bakery. The smell of burnt flour hanging in the air like a ghost that hasn't quite decided to leave. The baker himself looks stunned but unharmed. A few neighbors are patting his back, offering help, passing around buckets as if they're still expecting smoke to return. You raise your bell and ring it once. Let it be known. You call out, your voice rolling like low thunder across soot and ash, that the fire at Old Wind's Bakery is contained, no injuries reported, and the cause under inquiry. The shop will be closed for 3 days, if not longer, and the baker thanks all who lent their hands and water. You glance at Win, who nods, eyes glassy. He doesn't speak, but he presses something into your hand, a singed but still warm sweet roll. It tastes like cinnamon, charcoal, and gratitude. Later, you help post a wooden board over the hole in his roof. You don't have to. Crying is your job, not carpentry. But sometimes it feels wrong to walk away when your voice has just announced someone else's disaster. You wonder, sometimes, what people think happens when you're not speaking. Do they imagine you vanish like a whisper? Fold yourself into a bell and wait. The truth is, you carry the echoes with you. Every name, every warning, every wedding cheer and funeral wail, they linger. You wear them like invisible layers. You still think of the little girl whose goat won't stop escaping, the old man who wanted his lost hat proclaimed as the finest woolen bonnet in all 5 boroughs, the woman who asked you to announce her brother's death, but insisted you mention his laugh. And that's something you've learned, truly learned. It's not the facts people remember. It's how you give them, what shape you put around the truth. You could have said, there was a fire. But instead you said, the baker thanks all who lent their hands. That small shift, that's what stays. And speaking of staying, you've been doing this a long time. Longer than most thought you would. Longer than your knees appreciate. But there's no apprentice waiting in the wings. No young bellboy with dreams of vocal projection and rain-soaked boots. You tried once, briefly. A girl named Mary. Loud, funny, clever. But she ran off with a minstrel 3 months into training and never looked back. You hope they're happy. And dry. Still, you feel the weight of it now. This job you've carried like a second spine. The thought creeps in more often than it used to. Who will ring the bell after I stop? Historians still argue how long Criers typically served. Some say 10 years, others claim lifelong appointments. You suspect the truth lies, as always, in the gap between the lines. As long as your voice holds, and the town still listens. Yours still does. But for how much longer? You sit on the bakery stoop as the sun dips low, casting gold across the cobbles. A dog trots by with someone's laundry in its mouth. A boy runs after it, shouting threats far more creative than effective. You smile. Even now, there's something deeply comforting about watching the town settle into itself. Not because it's perfect, but because it's familiar. You know its rhythms, its flaws, its favorite jokes, and it knows you. You don't expect visitors after dark, especially not ones with scrolls. But tonight, just as you're halfway through peeling an especially judgmental-looking apple, there's a knock at your door. A sharp, deliberate knock. The kind that says this isn't about soup or gossip. You open the door to find a courier, young, drenched, and carrying a satchel stamped with the seal of the King's Road office. Official business. He hands you the scroll, bows slightly, and is off into the night without a word. You know better than to open something like this by candlelight. You've ruined too many announcements by catching them on fire, trying to read them in bed. But curiosity wins. You unroll the parchment with care. It's a royal decree, not addressed to you personally, but to all town criers and goods standing within the Eastern Territories. That includes you. It reads in stiff, overly looped handwriting. Let it be known that His Royal Majesty requests all official criers to be recorded for the purpose of permanent archival. Each shall present themselves, by region, to a designated scribe, who shall preserve their likeness and voice for future generations. You blink. They want to record you. For future generations? The word permanent feels heavy in your gut. You've always known your job is fleeting. Bells ring, voices rise, and then quiet. You deliver the moment and let it pass. That's always been the rhythm. But now someone wants to preserve that rhythm. Freeze it. Bottle your cadence like smoke and glass. You're not sure how to feel. The next morning, you find yourself rehearsing lines you've spoken 1,000 times. Hear ye, hear ye. They sound strange when no one's watching. Flat, too polished. You realize how much of your delivery is shaped by presence, by the cobbles under your feet, the faces watching, the widow in the front row who nods when you hit the right inflection. Will a scribe capture that? Will your bell's weight translate into ink? Later that day, you pass through the square as the sun warms the stones. A girl waves. A man with a donkey offers you a plum. Someone calls out, "What's the news, bellman?" You grin. Rain by sundown. 3 hens loose in the south alley, and the baker's roof still smells like cinnamon. Laughter. That's the part the scribes will miss. They'll get your voice, maybe even your words, but not the flavor. Not the tilt of your eyebrow when announcing a ridiculous tax. Not the way your bell rings, slightly different when you're feeling mischievous. Not the way a crowd breathes with you, sinking to your rhythm. Still, you agree to be recorded. You show up 3 days later at the magistrate's hall. A boy no older than 20 sits behind a desk stacked with parchment, staring at you like you're a curious insect with strong opinions. He asks you to just speak as you normally would. So you do. You announce the curfew for livestock. You explain the toll schedule for the ferry. You even throw in a mock proclamation about the mayor's missing hat. The boy scribbles furiously. You leave with a strange weight in your chest. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Like part of you has been boxed and shelved somewhere. A fragment frozen. You wonder if anyone will ever read it. Back in the square, things are the same as always. A woman accuses her neighbor of stealing eggs. Two lads try to build a cart ramp over the well. Someone, for reasons unknown, is trying to fit a goose into a pair of trousers. You ring your bell. Hear ye, hear ye. Please do not dress poultry. The goose is not amused. The boys scatter. The woman laughs. The goose remains undecided. And just like that, the weight lifts. Because this is where your voice belongs. Not in scrolls. Not in archives. Here, in the mess, in the warmth, in the small absurdities of town life. You're flattered the scribes want to preserve you. But you know the truth. Your legacy isn't in ink. It's in sound. You feel it before you hear it. The pull in your chest, the faint ache behind your ribs that tells you something is about to end. Not today, perhaps, but soon. This morning, you wake slower than usual. Your bell still hangs in its place. Your sash still folded on the stool. But the urgency isn't there. The streets haven't changed, but you have. Just a little. You notice how long it takes to lace your boots. How your voice takes a few minutes longer to warm. You step outside, expecting drizzle, but the air is clear, crisp, the kind of morning that would once make you want to shout just to hear the echo bounce back from the far wall of the square. Today, you let the quiet linger. There's no proclamation today. No tax updates, no runaway pigs, no suspicious root vegetables left anonymously at the mayor's door. You could invent something for fun, declare it Left Shoe Appreciation Day. But even that feels tired now. Instead, you just walk. No bell, no scroll. Just your feet, your town, your thoughts. You pass the places that used to fill your lungs with purpose. The bakery, now fully repaired, with the smell of honeyed crust in the air. The bridge, sturdy once more. The tannery gate where Brita vanished all those weeks ago. No one found her, but rumors about her sightings travel farther than she ever did. You pause at the town board and read your own handwriting, still posted from earlier in the week. Fair weather expected. Dogs must remain tethered. It almost looks like someone else wrote it. Some younger version of you. Someone who shouted because he could, not because he must. A boy walks by, maybe 12, holding a carved wooden bell, clearly handmade, and not particularly well. He shakes it, and it clunks dully. But he grins. Proud. Loud. You raise an eyebrow. Practicing, are you? He shrugs. Maybe. Mama says I talk too much. Thought I'd make it useful. You laugh. That's how I started. He looks at you with round, curious eyes. How long you been doing it? You think. Long enough to see 4 mayors lose their temper and 5 cats elected honorary council members. He blinks. You're joking. You hold up 2 fingers. Only half joking. The boy keeps walking, tapping his wooden bell on the stones. Not a great rhythm, but he'll find it. You head back to the square. Something's changed there. The crowd has gathered, not for you, but for the mayor. He's standing on a crate, reading from scroll of his own, face flushed and serious. You edge closer and hear the words. As part of a new trade route expansion, an official town crier will be dispatched to Eastmarch to train their local staff and establish communication norms. A few heads turn toward you. You blink. The mayor clears his throat. We'd like to request the assistance of our own esteemed crier, should he accept. Murmurs. Surprise. A few nods. One child claps, because children clap for things they don't fully understand. You feel the weight again, not the bad kind. The good kind. The kind that says you've done your job well enough, that people want more of you somewhere else. But you're not sure you want to leave. Still, Later that night, as you sit in your loft and gaze at your bell, you consider it. Maybe not a departure. Maybe just a passing of the voice. You write a letter, a short one, accepting the offer, but only for a few weeks. Just enough time to show the next town how to speak with clarity, with humor, with warmth. Just enough time to leave your voice behind like a handprint on the inside of a glass. You fold the note and slide it under the mayor's door before sunrise. The next morning, you're back in the square, bell in hand. People gather instinctively. Even when there's no news, they come. And you say, "Hear ye, hear ye. This crier will be away for a while. I'll be training the next generation of loudmouths somewhere a bit dustier, a bit hillier, and a lot less prepared for geese and trousers." Laughter. You ring your bell one last time that week. Clear, steady. It echoes across the square. Not an ending, just a softer note, a farewell in lowercase. And now it's quiet again. The bell has stopped ringing. The square is empty, and the sun has long since slipped behind the rooftops. The torches are out, the bakery is closed, and even the gossip has fallen asleep. You lean back into your pillow, or your blanket, or whatever soft place you've made for yourself, and breathe slowly. The kind of breath you take when the day is done and no one needs you to speak anymore. Imagine it. The rain tapping softly on the windowsills, not to rush you, not to bother you, but just to keep you company. The bell now still, resting on its nail with the dignity of a knight's sword sheathed for the night. You've walked in the crier's boots, felt the cobbles beneath you, carried the weight of news, both heavy and light. You've been the town's voice in its loudest and its loneliest hours. And now, in this gentle hush, you get to rest. Let the memory of those streets soften at the edges. Let the voices fade, one by one, until it's just you, and the steady rhythm of your breath, and the distant sound of a bell that may or may not be real. You've earned this silence. You've earned this sleep. The town will still be there in the morning. But for now, close your eyes, rest your voice, and let the quiet carry you home.